It was a hot afternoon in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of San Antonio, Texas, the kind of place where life moved slowly and people still knew each other by name. Small houses lined a dusty street, front yards worn by time and sun. Somewhere nearby, an old radio played softly, blending with the smell of oil and metal drifting from a modest mechanic shop built from wood and corrugated steel. That shop belonged to Daniel Harris, a hard-working mechanic known in the area for fixing old cars and motorcycles that others had given up on. He did not own much, but he carried himself with dignity and patience. Working beside the open doorway, wiping grease from his hands, Daniel focused on each repair as if it mattered deeply. Sitting a few steps away on the ground was his 6-year-old son, Ethan, thin, quiet, with observant eyes that seemed far too thoughtful for a child his age. Ethan spent his afternoons close to his father. Sometimes he drew shapes in the dirt with a stick. Other times he sorted loose screws or simply watched Daniel work in silence. There were no expensive toys, no screens, no distractions. What he had instead was time beside his father and lessons shared in simple words. Daniel worked long hours, often tired, but he never missed a chance to teach Ethan small truths about life, responsibility, and kindness. That afternoon, the familiar calm of the street was interrupted by a vehicle that clearly did not belong there. A polished luxury SUV rolled slowly down the road, drawing curious looks from neighbors. It stopped near the mechanic shop, and from it stepped Victoria Reynolds, a well-known businesswoman from Dallas, accustomed to corporate offices, private meetings, and fast decisions. She had come to town to evaluate a property she planned to buy for a new commercial project. Victoria's clothes were elegant, her posture confident, her sunglasses reflecting the sunlight. Every step she took seemed calculated. The simple street around her felt small, almost invisible to the life she was used to. As she walked past the shop, she noticed Ethan sitting on the ground, focused on his drawings. The contrast caught her attention. It felt almost unreal. She paused, more amused than curious, and spoke to the boy in a playful tone. She joked that someone so young might have some clever financial advice to share. A couple of people nearby smiled politely, assuming it was harmless humor. To Victoria, it was nothing more than a passing comment, the kind that carried no weight. But Ethan did not smile. He slowly looked up at her, studied her face, and answered calmly. He said money only mattered when it did not make people afraid of tomorrow. The words were simple, spoken without emotion, yet they settled heavily in the air. The street fell silent. Victoria's smile faded. For a brief moment, she did not know how to respond. That sentence, coming from a child sitting in the dirt, struck something deep and unexpected inside her. She felt a strange discomfort, a quiet crack in her certainty. Without saying anything else, she turned and continued walking. Behind her, Ethan lowered his gaze and returned to his drawings. Daniel kept working, unaware that in that brief exchange, something had shifted. A routine afternoon had been broken, and a life that seemed firmly built had begun, quietly, to change. After that brief encounter, Victoria returned to her normal routine. Meetings filled her schedule, phone calls followed one after another, and numbers once again dominated her days. Yet something felt different. In the quiet moments, when no one was speaking and no decisions demanded her attention, the image of the boy sitting on the ground returned to her mind. His words echoed softly, refusing to fade. 3 days passed. On the 4th day, Victoria did something she rarely allowed herself to do. She went back to the neighborhood alone. No assistance, no formal clothing, no sense of performance. She parked her car farther away and walked slowly down the street, noticing things she had ignored before. Children laughing, a woman hanging laundry, a man selling homemade lemonade. The place felt alive in a way her world never did. Ethan was there again, lining up small stones as if building invisible roads. When he saw Victoria, he froze for a moment. He did not run or smile. He simply watched her. Victoria approached carefully and greeted him with a softer voice. He answered quietly, without fear. She crouched down in front of him, a position she had not taken in years. They talked. Ethan explained that he stayed near the shop to help his father and that Daniel worked less hard when he felt company nearby. The words settled heavily in Victoria's chest. She asked what Ethan would buy if he had a lot of money. She expected a child's answer. Instead, he thought carefully and said he would buy time so his father could rest. Daniel appeared then, hands stained with grease, surprised to see her again. He greeted her politely. Victoria explained that she had not returned for business, but out of curiosity. From that day on, her visits became frequent. She listened more than she spoke. She learned about the jar of coins saved for emergencies, about helping customers who could not pay, about nights that ended late and mornings that started early. A connection formed naturally. Victoria brought Ethan a book and sat on the ground to read with him. There were no photos, no posts, no audience, only presence. But reality soon returned. The development project was moving forward, and the land where the shop stood was essential. Victoria knew that if she continued, Daniel and Ethan would lose their place. The decision approached quickly. For the first time, choosing no longer felt simple. This time, it was not about profit or growth. It was about breaking something fragile and meaningful that had quietly begun to matter more than she expected. The pressure intensified. Investors called daily, deadlines closed in, and contracts waited to be signed. Victoria tried to focus, but her thoughts refused to stay on numbers alone. Every choice felt heavier than before. She realized that moving forward no longer meant success without cost. The image of Ethan and the sound of Daniel's tools echoed in her mind, blending with doubts she had never allowed herself to face. On one of her last visits, Victoria arrived different, quieter, distracted. Ethan noticed immediately and asked if something was wrong. She tried to smile, but failed. Daniel sensed it too. With calm respect, he mentioned that he understood if she had important matters to attend to. His words felt like a gentle goodbye. That night, alone in her apartment, Victoria signed the papers. There was no satisfaction, no relief, only a deep silence that followed the pen as it left the page. She told herself that this was who she had always been, someone who made hard choices and moved on. The next morning, official notices were delivered. The shop was required to close and vacate the property. Daniel received the news without protest. He quietly began packing his tools, placing each one carefully into boxes. Ethan did not understand at first. He only noticed that his father spoke less and that the shop slowly emptied. When Victoria returned to the street, the door was open and the space nearly bare. Ethan sat on the ground in silence. When he saw her, he did not stand. He looked at her and asked, in a calm voice, whether she still believed money did not bring fear. The question struck her deeply. Victoria could not answer. In that moment, she understood she had failed, not as a businesswoman, but as a human being. She walked back to her car feeling hollow. She had gained the project, but lost something she could not define or recover. As she drove away, she reached the lowest point she had ever known, and she realized that if nothing changed, this emptiness would remain with her forever. That night, Victoria could not sleep. The images replayed over and over in her mind. The empty shop, Ethan sitting silently on the ground, Daniel's tired face as he packed away his tools. For the first time, success felt meaningless. She realized that all her achievements had been built on decisions that looked right on paper but left something essential behind. And now, that absence was impossible to ignore. As the sun rose, Victoria made a choice she had never made before. She canceled meetings, ignored calls, and drove back to the neighborhood without a plan, guided only by a growing certainty that she could not walk away like this. When she arrived, Daniel was loading boxes into an old truck. His movements were slow, heavy with exhaustion. Victoria approached quietly and apologized. She did not speak as an executive or an investor. She spoke as a person who had been wrong. Daniel listened without interruption. Ethan appeared beside him, watching closely. Victoria took the contracts from her bag and tore them in half. Calmly, she said the project was canceled. The land would not be taken, the shop would remain. More than that, she offered support to improve the business, not as an owner, but as a partner, so Daniel could work with dignity and less burden. Daniel hesitated. Pride and caution held him back, but when he looked at his son, he saw relief in Ethan's eyes. He agreed with one condition: everything would be done with respect, not charity. Victoria accepted without hesitation, knowing this agreement mattered more than any deal she had signed before. Over time, the shop was repaired but kept its simple soul. Daniel worked fewer hours and rested more. Ethan joined a reading program and began writing his thoughts in a notebook Victoria gave him. One page said his greatest dream was to see his father smile more. Slowly, that dream came true. Victoria changed as well. She stepped away from constant attention and began supporting small local projects quietly. When asked why, she said she had learned how to listen. Years later, she returned to the street. The shop was still there. Daniel greeted her warmly. Ethan, older now, smiled and asked if she remembered what he had said about money. Victoria told him she remembered every day. This story reminds us that the greatest lessons often come from the smallest voices, that sometimes we must fall to understand what truly matters, and that real wealth is not measured by what we own, but by the lives we choose to protect along the way. If this story moved you, share in the comments what touched you most. And if you want to hear more stories about real life and human values, follow the channel and stay with us.